Hey, as I'm sure you've gathered from the title, today we're talking about Scooby-Doo in Arabian Nights, originally aired on TBS on September 3rd, 1994. And as I'm certain I've said before, even though it's not specifically a true Scooby title, this is an ensemble piece in every way. This has always been my personal least favorite Scooby project, and I'm not alone. In 2024, Collider ranked the 10 worst rated animated films of the 1990s on Letterboxd, and Arabian Nights made it immediately at number 10, with an average rating of 2.42 out of 5. So I'm in large company really not liking this movie. As such, I have put off talking about it for years, knowing that inevitably I would have to tackle it and get this over with. This year, I've really been reading a lot of classic literature, starting the year off with The Count of Monte Cristo. I loved it, by the way. Read the beautiful Robin Buss translation from Penguin Classics. Monte Cristo, however, heavily references the stories of the 1001 Nights, of which films like Disney's Aladdin, and in turn this Scooby title, pull from as their source. Mostly. Finally, I was simply too interested and in the mood, and so I also picked up the Penguin Classics translation and release of the Arabian Nights, or Tales of 1001 Nights, across 3 volumes. And because I also happen to be me and talk about what I do on here, it seemed that really I had no other choice. Today, I will finally be combining my interests and forcing us all to relive Scooby's Arabian Nights adventure. All my references in this video come from the 3-volume Penguin Classics release. Truly pick those up if you are interested in what you might see or hear in this video outside of Scooby. Without further ado, let me take you on this magic carpet ride. Have you ever heard the phrase "open sesame" used in some piece of media? I have to assume you have at some point, including Scooby. This phrase actually originates from the story of Alibaba, associated with the Arabian Nights, or the Tales of 1001 Nights. If you're unfamiliar with the story of the Nights beyond Scooby, and perhaps of course Disney's Aladdin, you might be more surprised by some of the content. The medieval Arabic story collection itself is made up of many stories put together in all kinds of ways over several centuries. Perhaps not unlike Scooby's foray into the world, the tales are told with a framing device. In the story, the king has been sexually betrayed by his wife, cuts off her head along with the slaves, sleeps with a different virgin girl every night, and then kills her when the morning approaches. In hopes of breaking this cycle, the daughter of the king's vizier offers herself up, but finds a way to get around her execution. You see, she tells the king a fascinating story with her sister, who she brought with her into the bedroom, but she leaves the story intentionally unfinished as dawn approaches on this particular night, and her life is spared so the king can hear the rest of the story the following night. As such, every night she finishes one of the tales, only to start another one to keep this new cycle going, lasting, as one might guess, 1001 nights. Long story short, her life ultimately is spared and the cycle is broken. At least that's how the story goes by this point, that which is being referenced by Scooby. This framing device was added many years later, and there's no one specific canonical text of the nights with a fixed number of stories, or the order they're told in. For example, you might also know of the story of Sinbad, of which DreamWorks even made a highly underrated film based on his stories, and which also is heavily associated with the Nights now. Sinbad is referenced in this very Scooby project, where Magilla Gorilla takes on the name. However, this story was translated into French by Antoine Galland in the 1600s, and when he was told it was part of a larger collection, he simply assumed it was one of the stories of the Nights and added it to the canon himself. However, there historically were no Arabic manuscripts of the Nights containing anything to do with Sinbad, and it only shows up after this, influenced by his work. Galland's work ultimately only contained 35.5 stories, not even close to 1001 Nights even when broken up, so he took it upon himself to add stories that he was told verbally to make it longer. This is where we now get what are considered the orphan stories, those such as Alibaba and most famously Aladdin, Sinbad being added alongside them. Ultimately though, these translations would become so well known that the imagery became popular and recognized around the world, especially things such as the flying carpet, which you'll see referenced and utilized here in Scooby as much as in Disney's Aladdin, often detached entirely from the familiar framing device. The tales in a lot of ways aren't very different from the fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm or Hans Christian Andersen that Disney pulled from in many of their classics. And as such, though perhaps not canonically part of the Nights, it does make sense that Disney would adapt Aladdin as one of their great Renaissance films in 1992. Although how they got there is a story in itself. By sheer coincidence, after I wrote all of this first part of the video, my personal favorite YouTuber Lindsay Ellis just released a video titled "Did Disney Really Steal Aladdin?", which goes into that side of things and more for some of this. Definitely watch that also. But back to our dog playing in the Nights. By 1992, Scooby was in an awkward place. 1988 had seen the last 2 TV films, Ghoul School and Reluctant Werewolf, and in that same year, the franchise got one last refresher in the form of a pup named Scooby-Doo. The series would last until 1991, and Scooby would go silent for a couple of years after. For Disney, Aladdin became such a big success the following year that it inspired a full TV series sequel, with Aladdin the series premiering in 1994. With Scooby not having been utilized for a good long while, he was finally brought back to television that same year with our subject today, Arabian Nights. Though home video would later retitle it Scooby-Doo in Arabian Nights, simply because Scooby sells at the end of the day, and because it was meant to capitalize on Aladdin's success. The part of the special that is clearly a parody of the story is pulling specifically from Disney's 1992 film version that children would recognize and be looking for. But as it's not actually a Scooby adventure specifically, they're really in it the least out of everybody. There would be several changes and interesting aspects of the film from the usual fare. One notable thing is that this would be the last true performance of Scooby's original voice actor, Don Messick, as the voice of the character in a real full project like this before his retirement and eventual death. Likewise when it comes to voicing his Yogi Bear character, Boo Boo. This also goes for Alan Melvin as the voice of Magilla Gorilla, appearing as Sinbad in the film like we said. Like a pup, the animation style became much more modern and stylized, and since it's not a Scooby solo title, there's no mystery solving to be found whatsoever. Scooby and Shaggy featuring solo without the others, not even Scrappy, and serving as our stand-ins for the young woman telling the tales of the Nights in the original story. This was also the final project featuring Scooby to be done exclusively by Hanna-Barbera, before they would begin to co-produce with Warner Bros. Animation on the next project. As such, it was also the last time Casey Kasem would voice Shaggy during the original era, not returning until 2002, almost a decade later, where Warner had taken over entirely by then. Obviously though, with the movie just really not being the best, and eventually the shakeup with Warner taking over, Scooby was dropped from being a priority for the time being after, not appearing in another new large project for 4 years. In other words, Arabian Nights was sort of the nail in Scooby's coffin for the time, retiring him until 1998's Zombie Island resurrected him. That's another story though, and I have it over on Patreon, but maybe I've been too harsh on today's subject. Maybe everyone has. I've stayed away from watching it for years. Then again, maybe the reputation is deserved, and you'll get that negativity that perhaps you're looking for. Let's go ahead and go over the film and break it down, from the actors, characters, and story, and see what does and really does not hold up. And for reference, I will solely be using my DVD to look at this today. While the movie is streaming or available to rent and buy digitally in HD wherever things like that happen, it's a really bad AI upscale that makes it genuinely unwatchable, more than it already might be visually. Stick to your disc for this one, or VHS, whatever floats your boat. The movie actually just opens up immediately with dropping Shaggy and Scooby flying on a magic carpet upon us, without time to process how this is possible, how they came upon this as an option, or to contemplate that magic is real in Scooby now. But don't worry, Hanna and Barbera were involved as they crashed through their names. From Shaggy, we learn they're traveling by carpet taxi because they're hoping to become royal food tasters, and would even be getting paid for it. They land and handle paying their taxi fare, and the guard they find is about on par with Aladdin's representation already, for better or worse. Honestly, kind of bizarre that it looks like this is set during the same time as Disney's Aladdin, while the boys are contemporary, but I guess we aren't supposed to think about that.
Suckers. Get that, Scoob? Suckers for dessert. Yum.
The boys are hired immediately after their interview with the chef, and they already have work to do, the best kind for them since it's eating. As they chow down, they can't believe the other food tasters would quit, while one of their coworkers said the last one didn't make it to dinner. They say their appetite will be no issue, but the man warns it wasn't losing their appetite they need to worry about. Obviously, they're food tasters to make sure the food isn't deadly. Their predecessors died rather than quitting. Scooby realizes they're fine and tries to wake Shaggy, who asks if they're in heaven, only to see the plates are empty. Thus, he immediately jumps to the two of them being in hell, which I will give them is very funny. But of course, the food wasn't poisoned this time, it's all fine. Except that they're warned they're probably good as dead anyway, since they ate the entire lunch meant for the Caliph. When the chef presents lunch to the Caliph, they find an empty platter with only the boys on it. Now that we've reached the Caliph himself, it's important to note who voices him. Predictably being a character with glasses, he's voiced by none other than Eddie Deason. Maybe you know him as Eugene in Grease, the kid with glasses in the Polar Express, Mandark in Dexter's Lab, and so on. Most notably though, about exactly 9 years after this, he would voice Gibby Norton, one of the recurring characters in What's New Scooby-Doo, typically trying to win over Velma. The Caliph expectedly is not happy with his royal lunch having been eaten, bringing up the penalty, which is the classic off with their heads move. The boys end up in a revolving door type chase, then hide, and we get a good look at their unfortunate choice.
You know men are not allowed in the harem. Except for me, of course.
The Caliph dismisses the guards and moves on to choosing his wife, and having lost his glasses during the excitement, mistakes Shaggy in disguise as the perfect woman for him. To distract him, Shaggy decides to tell him a story, hoping to put him to sleep so they can escape. This, of course, is exactly like the narrator of the 1001 Nights, where she tells one of the stories every night to the king to extend her life. So in this case, the movie is indeed directly taking inspiration from the source material, though we've replaced the murderous king with our childish Caliph, perhaps more appropriate for the family-friendly audience in mind. And this is where we get our first story, that of Aliyah-Din and the magic lamp. And here we've actually gender-swapped Aladdin into a girl and the princess into a prince, which at least throws off the scent of the recent Disney version. As the story starts, the prince has rejected another potential match, while Haman, the Sultan's vizier and equivalent to Jafar in the Disney film, has to clean it up. Notably, Haman is voiced by John Kassir, who many might know as the voice of Tales from the Crypt's Crypt Keeper, which is fitting. The Sultan longingly remembers a young princess promised at birth to his son that would have made them happy, but was abducted. Outside, meanwhile, a young woman who happens to have the same eyes as the missing princess catches the eye of the prince. As the Sultan orders all eligible women to present themselves for the prince to find a wife, Haman clearly starts to scheme and plant seeds in the prince's mind. But when the girl sees the prince is watching, she runs off, leaving only her scarf. Haman gets to work speaking to the Lord of the Amulet, notably voiced by Tony Jay, who many might know as the voice of Monsieur Dark in Beauty and the Beast, or perhaps especially as Judge Claude Frollo in The Hunchback of Notre Dame. We find it's been 18 years since the Lord last gave Haman guidance, when they had the princess abducted, everything now going according to plan with the Sultan's health failing and the prince unmarried. The Lord offers the advice of finding the magic lamp in the Tomb of Riches, which allows the beholder to control the genie within. Only the pure of heart may enter and leave, however, which means Haman can't do it. Only Aliyah-Din. Haman of course then goes to her and tells her lies of how the lamp can help the Sultan. And now that we have a better look at her, Aliyah-Din is voiced by Jennifer Hale. She voices many characters in the franchise, but most probably know her best for voicing Thorn of the Hex Girls 5 years later. On her way, she bumps into the prince who's been looking for her, the only one of these girls he'd consider marrying at first sight like his father wants. But she still runs off to fulfill her new obligation. She meets with Haman, the ground opens, and he warns her to only take the lamp, but with all the beauty, she can't help herself and takes a flower, causing everything to start closing in as she finds the lamp. In the dark, Aliyah-Din sees the lamp, says to rub it, and does so, exposing the genie with a familiar-looking voice, as he's played by none other than Yogi Bear from Hanna-Barbera's The Yogi Bear Show. And with him, as always, is Boo Boo, still a genie in training, both here to now give her 3 wishes. Back at the palace, Haman uses a potion to knock out both members of the royal family, locking the prince away and using more magic to disguise himself as the boy. With the genies, Aliyah-Din wishes to save the Sultan and be worthy of the prince, so Yogi transforms her into a more princess-looking outfit and takes them to the line waiting to meet the prince.
End of the line, sugar.
Yeah, 1001 pardons, Your Honor.
Presenting in front of the prince, who really is Haman, he immediately spots the lamp and takes interest in her. Having no desire for her other riches, Prince Haman takes the lamp, topples her over, and reveals himself. Just as Jafar does, he now controls the genie and uses the magic for his own evil plans of becoming the Sultan. Aliyah-Din is thrown in with the real prince, where she finds a rock and frees him from his shackles. She then says a prayer to Allah, asking for help. Sultan Haman, back on the throne, wishes to rule the world next, causing everything to confusingly shrink enough for Aliyah-Din to escape and see the Sultan preparing his final wish. While she messes with the lamp, the Sultan wishes to live forever, but the lamp flies away, now controlled again by Aliyah-Din, who wishes for everything to go back to how it was. The real prince immediately has Haman arrested, then sees Aliyah-Din and presents her with her scarf he's been hoping to return, not unlike Cinderella's shoe. He asks for her to be his princess, but she admits she wished for it and doesn't deserve it, yet he says he fell for her long before that, allowing them to be happily together, as the Sultan hears of his son's joy. He sadly says they can't be married though, as she's not of noble birth, something even a second wish cannot change. But when the Sultan hears her name is Aliyah-Din, he reveals that is the name of the lost princess, promised to his son at birth, meaning their marriage can proceed, as she really is of noble blood. For her final wish, she asks for a beautiful wedding, giving Boo Boo his full-fledged genie status, while Yogi finally gets his picnic basket. Shaggy finishes up his story and they try to leave, but the Caliph is still wide awake as ever, and ready for marriage. He even has the royal dressmaker prepare a dress for the occasion. Scooby then enters as the dressmaker's assistant in drag himself, while the Caliph asks for another story. To get away from the romantics, we go into his interpretation of Sinbad the Sailor. Interestingly, remember, this is one we know for a fact did not at all originate from any Arabic text and was only added to the Nights later in France. So the only 2 stories getting any focus in this movie are orphans rather than ones truly from the main canon. We see something very different from the text when it begins anyway, with a big ship named the Queen Murray, rather than the Queen Mary. We then meet this pirate captain with another incredibly familiar voice, that being Charlie Adler. You might know him as the Big Heads in Rocko's Modern Life, Cow and Chicken in Cow and Chicken, Dr. Doom in a buttload of Marvel stuff, Mr. Whiskers in Brandy and Mr. Whiskers, sometimes Buster Bunny like co-star John Kassir, but also what I recognize him most as, the Hamburglar in The Wacky Adventures of Ronald McDonald. It's almost distracting here how recognizable he is, really. Anyway, he's looking for a new crew, while we see Sinbad himself, played here by Magilla Gorilla, of Hammer Bear's Magilla Gorilla. Trying to find the right ship for his vacation, he mistakenly gets on the pirate ship instead of the Queen Murray, and when the captain gets a good look at him, he decides to take advantage of the situation. Keeping Sinbad believing it's a vacation, he tries to provide entertainment, having him believe it's a scavenger hunt when they set sail, when they're really going down the captain's checklist of things to steal. After a lot of cartoon antics, they find the first item, this massive egg, but it's too heavy for the captain to move, resulting in more antics, and the mom is pissed off, attacking them as they get it to the ship, so much that she follows them further. Their next checkpoint ends up being a roller coaster ride, with a little balloon of classic Magilla, so this story definitely is not staying period appropriate like the other. They wait a cartoonishly long amount of time in line, and then the captain is too short to ride. When they get going, his attempts to steal the jewels inside get hindered by a robotic shark and more. We do see Davy Jones's footlocker though. Eventually they arrive to find their last item, following signs supposedly leading to it, where Sinbad has to once more save the captain.
Now let us get after the toothbrush.
No smooch?
After several more cartoonish signs, they find their desired golden toothbrush too far down, so the captain pushes Sinbad. Following another sign to a cave, several more take him to a door, where he finds a very sophisticated Cyclops. The nice man directs him through the home, and inside the bathroom there awaits the toothbrush. The Cyclops starts to wonder what's taking so long though.
I say, I've got tickets to Cats.
Inside, Sinbad and the toothbrush are missing, as the gorilla is already climbing back up to the captain. But confronted, Sinbad hides in a banana peel that gets flown away.
I just know this is going to make me miss the opening song of Cats.
Sinbad makes a safe landing and hands the toothbrush over, but the Cyclops catches up and they get trapped up on this tree. Thankfully, Sinbad breaks the fourth wall as they're saved.
I say.
Amazing how things happen right on cue in a cartoon, isn't it?
They make it back to their ship just as the island seems to sink, then is revealed to be on top of a whale. The island then falls on top of them, and then the Queen Murray just about runs the two sailors and the Cyclops over. Eventually, the ragged ship pulls back in, Sinbad now done with his vacation, and taking all their souvenirs for himself. The captain cries himself a river until he remembers he still has the egg, but then it hatches, and flies away to find Mom, leaving the captain sunk. And also run over by the Queen Murray again for good measure. The Cyclops then gets off, sees his toothbrush with Sinbad, and snatches it back. So happy ending for him. Even the baby bird finds a mom, just in Sinbad. The real one does catch up and take her baby though, our final happy ending. The Caliph once again really enjoyed the story and is ready to enter the marriage immediately, the chef even having a cake ready. As Shag and Scoob can't help themselves and try it out, the chef finally recognizes them, so they hide in the cake, where a guard chops the wedding outfit clean off. However, just as the king spares the storyteller in the original 1001 Nights tales after her many stories, the Caliph decides to spare the boys because he liked their storytelling so much. They just have to stay on as royal storytellers, so they all enjoy the cake together, seeming to have found a happy medium.
Scooby-Dooby-Doo!
And that's Scooby-Doo and Arabian Nights. Honestly, I feel somewhat conflicted after revisiting this. It's not necessarily as severely bad as I remember, but it still also is not some wonderful hidden gem at all. First off, for the two stories themselves, they're almost comically different in execution. The story of Aladdin here, guest starring Yogi Bear, is shockingly straightforward. I feel like I'm really just watching a direct-to-video low-budget ripoff of the Disney film with the gender swapped. Specifically something like the Good Times Entertainment version, which I grew up with. If it weren't for Yogi, this would just be very run-of-the-mill, and it takes up the majority of the movie, which is no surprise since Disney's film was the clear inspiration for this existing. Perhaps because of that, though, it's not especially interesting. Yogi isn't present enough or funny and in his element enough to really add that much to the story. Tony Jay might have made things interesting, but after that one scene, the character never comes back. It feels like I'm just watching a watered-down version of the Disney film for the most part, and between the two, I would rather watch the Disney film. The animation here is not even slightly comparable. The entertainment value is nowhere near the same. There's just not very much to enjoy, and I've always felt that way since I was young. younger. It's not some disastrous and unwatchable product, it's just not all that fun. On the other hand, Sinbad feels like it's the complete opposite. If the Aladdin segment was almost too close to expectations, the Sinbad segment feels like it's vaguely inspired by the idea of Sinbad, but almost in name only, really. Watching this much shorter segment of the movie feels like you're just watching a classic Magilla Gorilla episode or a slapstick Looney Tunes short, and even then I felt like a lot of it went on for too long, short as it is, or often fell flat. I'd say it's almost the more enjoyable segment, just because it feels like it's actually doing more interesting and original things with the idea, and has more entertainment value with the attempts to be cartoonish and embrace that. But I still don't think I would put it on by choice if I had other options. Aladdin and Sinbad are the main focus and runtime of this product, and that's the problem. Personally, I would just rather be watching any other Hanna-Barbera product other than this. The framing device is why we're all here though. I at least do enjoy that somewhat. It's hard not to like Shaggy and Scooby for me, especially with the original voices here together still one last time. And that makes this worth checking out once just to see their final performances in a bigger project like this together. The segment, like a lot of things in the overall product, has some negative stereotypes, much like Disney's film, but the biggest make or break is probably how people tolerate the Caliph. Deezin has a very specific voice he does for these kinds of characters, one that is intentionally annoying, and he's definitely dancing on that line here, though I would say he's more restrained than he is in some of these roles, but if you just can't stand him, this is probably pretty frustrating to watch anyway. The animation also is pretty rough, the art style itself being really cheap and off-putting compared to what most people would be used to seeing the Scooby characters in, but the visuals themselves are just not good. I'm not sure if this was done on tape or just early digital. This was that weird transitionary period where it was kind of both, and even on the DVD, it's really rough and looks tragically bad, to put it simply. Try watching the HD AI upscale that Warner offers, and it's nigh unwatchable. The story of how the boys got here also leaves a lot to be desired. There's no attempt to really explain how the magic exists, why they are here beyond the job, how they got here, nothing that makes sense of why the Scooby characters have any business being involved with this movie. And I know why, obviously, the same reason Magilla and Yogi are here, you know? But I mean within the story itself and not being able to justify it. The boys by this time had already dropped the other three outside of a pup, and here, dropping the mystery aspect just really takes away the remaining overall appeal. A lot of great people worked on this, even people that would later go on to work on the Zombie Island era a few years later, like Glenn Leopold or Lance Falk, but there just wasn't really much to save. I think its place as one of the worst 90s animated movies is somewhat justified. It's not the absolute worst, but it's not really enjoyable, and I can't see myself revisiting it again anytime soon. With all that said, I think I've spent all the time I want to with this one personally, so I'll see myself out. If you want anything to do with the 1001 Nights, either just go watch the Disney film again, orphan story though it may be, or go pick up those Penguin Classics volumes of the originals like me, rather than spending time on this one if you've already seen it. If you want to support the channel and talking about more lovable Scooby titles, the Patreon is now live. I've got exclusive videos diving into the Zombie Island and Witches Ghost movies and more over there. Subscribe here so you don't miss the next one, and like this video while you're at it, all that stuff. I'll see you whenever I see you. Bye!